Hi guys, how's it going? Ivano here with a new video, and today we're going to be discussing a little bit about the state of the game and also Bioware's plans for the next patch. So since there was a post on the PvP forum yesterday, we'll go over that. But first I wanted to talk a little bit about the PvP Revamp 7.2 and how the game is doing at the moment. If we do a little recap for the ones of you that maybe don't remember or already have forgotten what the patch 7.2 PvP Revamp was all about, basically, the goal was to get more players to play PvP and increase overall participation, which I guess is a good change. They introduced a battle pass system with new rewards, which looks something like this, and also made it so that free-to-play players can now play unlimited war zones, which I mean, in theory is good because it means more players playing the game, which is of course nice. They introduced the Battle Pass system, also known as PvP Season 1, which is good as well, even though I personally don't like the rewards much. Rewards means, again, more people participating, which is nice. What I don't like personally so much is that the rewards can be earned just by playing or buying them with credits, so they're kind of participation trophies, and there is no sense of achievement when you actually get them. But then again, at least it was some content for PvP players, so it's better than nothing. Bioware also separated the queues. They introduced a separate arena queue, which by itself also is, in my opinion, a good change because people who enjoy arena could now theoretically practice in the arena for ranked without needing to fear about losing their rating, and people who prefer war zones will not have to play random arenas in between. But then on the bad side, BioWare did actually not bring any of the features that people were asking for, such as a map filter or map select, right? Because some people simply don't enjoy playing hardball. So many people were asking for a filter. So let's say you never have to play Odessen again. And then finally, of course, BioWare took away a feature that few but very dedicated players cared about, which was, of course, ranked PvP. So they created the perfect opportunity to practice for ranked arenas by separating the war zone and the arena queue. And then they took away the only reason really to practice, which is not great. But then the worst change that wasn't even mentioned anywhere in the patch notes or not in the developer stream is this one, such that as of patch 7.2, it is possible to queue with a full 8-man premade for normal war zones. Which, if you have seen my stream, we of course already did on day one. We queued up with our guild and a couple of friends. We just globaled everyone. It was ridiculous, not really fun. I made a video about it. I hoped BioWare would maybe change something. But of course, here we are roughly, 2 months later, and it's still in the game. So the result was basically that those former ranked players that now had no more arenas to play and other very experienced players, of course, also our guild, are now forming, bigger premades than before. So you have regularly 6 or 7-man premades that you're going to be facing, which only made the premade versus solo thing way worse in PvP than it was before. It basically just means if you're a solo player or you're queuing duo with a friend, you can expect to get farmed a lot right now. Because the damage in the current meta is so high compared to healing, then if you're a 6-man premade, you will always win against a 4-man premade. I don't care what anyone says. Even if you're the 4 best players to ever play this game, 6 good players, each of them will do, let's say, 10k DPS. 4 great players, if they're under pressure, can maybe still do 50k DPS. But that's obviously less than the 6 good players. So you're going to be losing that fight while the rest of your team, which will probably be new players, just randomly AFK and spawn or try to spam click on some nodes to win the objective. So even if you queue as a 4-man premade, you'll get farmed a lot, and you regularly will play against the same 6-man premade, 7-man premade that you've already seen 2 games in a row, and that's not fun, right? So it's not fun for anyone. It's not fun for the team that is losing, of course. It's also not fun if you're a 6-man premade and you're just farming new players all evening long. So what happens? It's not fun. People stop playing, which of course makes the problems worse because the matchmaking doesn't work properly. And in fact, even some very experienced players now have stopped queuing altogether unless they are at least in a 6-man premade because they don't want to get farmed, which is also just sad. Now, I myself, I'm of course guilty of pre-mating, if you want to call it like that, right? If you have seen my stream, you will see that me and my guild, we often queue as 5 or 6 or more players. Because what do you want to do? The only option we are left with is to either get farmed or queue as 6+ ourselves. So typically that's what we do. And at least if we go against a team of solo players, we will let them get a free win in exchange for just damage farming. But if you're on the receiving side of that pre-made lottery, what do? You cannot leave the game because Bioware also increased the leaving penalty, which is now 20 minutes. And of course, to make matters worse, the game cannot differentiate between someone actively clicking on the Leave Warzone button and a disconnect, which happens often enough. So yeah, not a very fun experience right now, which is, why, as far as I can see, participation, if anything, has gone down from before the PvP revamp. And you can see here on the forums that this is exactly what people are commenting about. Of course, you always have a few people trolling, but there's a lot of threads about it. People are complaining about it. So what does Bioware do about it? For some reason, they are changing the way that you earn defender points on Alderaan. Not exactly sure how this is really addressing some of the problems, but I guess people want to earn medals. So they're making it a little bit easier to gain defender medals. First, on the Alderaan map, I tested this on PTS. Didn't really notice it. But yeah, I guess it can be nice for people to earn medals a little bit easier. And then they will change that later, expand it to all maps, and they will also make it so that you only need 7 medals instead of 8 to get the full credit for your PvP season. But to be honest, who cares about that if all you do in the Warzone is just getting farmed at spawn? It doesn't really matter, does it? Additionally, of course, the class balance right now is probably in one of its worst states that has ever been. Bioware, to give them some credit, they fixed some classes. For example, the Marauder Sentinel, which was really broken at the beginning of 7.0, got a couple of well-deserved nerfs. Some people might say probably one nerf too much, but they addressed it at least. But then again, they did buff some other classes which already were very strong or overperforming in PvP at least, probably because of PvE. But yeah, they did buff lethality, they did buff madness, which are now really overpowered, which is why everyone is playing them. They also buffed tanks, which were already strong in PvP to do more damage. So now you see at least 2 tanks per Warzone in my games at least. Bioware needs to change something. They need to buff the underperforming specs. They need to buff Arsenal, Mercenary, for example, Marksman, Sniper. No one is even playing it outside of trolling. And Concealment Operative also has a very hard time. And additionally, of course, some of those overperforming classes, like especially lethality and madness, need to be brought down a peg. A couple of tacticals, Neural Trigger comes to mind, should simply be removed. And then Jug and PT tanks, in my opinion, also really need nerfs because they're simply doing too much damage for how tanky they are as well. Of course, Bioware is not addressing any of that, at least as far as we know. Sometimes they do surprises just before or when the patch comes out. But currently, there's no class changes or class balance changes planned. So yeah, Bioware, if you're listening, please nerf lethality. However, Jackie is saying here that they are looking at some matchmaking changes, which is good. They're not really exactly telling us what they will change or how it will work, but basically they have read the threads on the forum and they will try to make it, much more likely that if you're queuing in a premade, you will be paired against another premade when possible, which basically just means if you're queued, you're sitting in queue, the system will look for another premade, and if it cannot find one, it will wait a longer time than it's already waiting at the moment, trying to find a good match for your team. And of course, in general, this is good. As a premade enjoyer myself, you don't want to play against a team of random solo players. You want to play against the other premade that's queuing, or other premates, hopefully, and you want to fight them, and you want to win, and you want to prove that your team is better. That's the whole point. And it's, of course, way more fun than, farming the same solo players all night long. So in general, a good idea. Unfortunately, Bioware is not really telling us how it will work because they're probably afraid that we're going to be abusing the system, which of course we will do anyway. But nevertheless, what they're saying here is the fact that they're trying to get, let's say, more equal matches will basically just mean that queue times will get longer because the system will try to look for another premade. The other premade is maybe still in another war zone. So, you're going to be waiting 10 minutes in queue, where now maybe you would have gotten a pop against a random team after 5 minutes in queue. So this will increase queue times, which is, of course, not good. So Bioware is kind of explaining it here. With this amount as time passes with the player in a queue, there becomes a delta. I'm not sure if this is even English, where we will prioritize popping a match over everything else. So basically they're saying eventually, let's say after 15 or 20 minutes, if the matchmaking system cannot find another premade to pair you against, they will open a match against a bunch of solo players anyway, which of course is exactly how it works now. Sounds like they're simply somehow increasing the timer. And that's not great because right now we're already sitting 10 to 15 minutes in queue. It was definitely noticeable that the queue times got way longer from 7.1.1 to 7.2. So I'm really asking, like, how much longer can it be? You're waiting 15 minutes in queue for a 10-minute war zone. You're spending more time AFKing on the fleet than actually playing the game. So again, not great. So yeah, based on what is this matchmaking working? Again, we don't really know. Group size is definitely one thing. What else could it be? Some kind of hidden elo rating, but then how is that calculated? Are they taking your win rate, which doesn't really mean anything? Because, for example, in the beginning of the season, we were tryharding with our team. We won every warzone, at least for the first 10 games or whatever. So we have 100% win rate. Didn't feel any difference in the opponents that we were playing. So eventually we just stopped caring, and then the win rate started going down, 80%, 70%, 60%. And if you're always queuing as a 6-player premade and you're farming the opposing team, then it's kind of start to feel bad as well. So sometimes maybe you're not trying your hardest to actually win the game, and that's the thing, right? Most of those damage farming premates, you will have probably experienced it already, don't really care about winning the objectives. They just want to farm damage and kill other players. So that means on average, they will have a worse win rate, compared to their relative skill. So win rate is not a very good thing to match players against each other. But group size only, of course, can also not be a factor because compositions matter, right? You will have teams that will queue with 4 DPS, and you will have other teams that are queuing 4 tanks. Obviously, you cannot allow that either. So you need to take into account the compositions, which makes it harder because tanks right now are really OP. With the amount of hard defensive cooldowns that are in the game nowadays, the tank just has way more impact than any other class in the game. So 8-man premates, with a pre-med comp with 2 healers and a tank, or even 2 tanks, is just way too strong, and you're never going to find a good match. So what should they do instead? Maybe limit premates to maximum 4 players, how it was before the patch 7.2. And also there should be a maximum of 1 tank per team. I don't mean per premate. You should never go into a war zone where there's 2 or 3 tanks on one team, because they just make it impossible to actually play the game. You are never going to cap SWTOR against them if they have, eyes and are not AFKing. And guard is really strong. Bioware obviously noticed that. They removed guard at some point from the DPS specs, and now tanks only have it, which means more people are playing tanks. Obviously, on a tank, you're not going to get global so fast. But I just see too many tanks right now in the war zones. So I think they should limit premates back to maximum 4 players. That still means that you could play with your friends. Just, you can, if you have a lot of friends, then maybe you can make 2 groups instead of a 6-man premade, which is nice enough. But I think maximum 1 tank per team in a war zone would be enough. So I would make it so that, let's say, a tank and heal premade that queues up as 4 players will never be on the same team with another tank heal premade, since that just leads to stalemates where you're never going to cap a door on WoldStar. or even mid in Alderaan is just impossible currently. On this forum thread, some people were saying that as a solo player, you should never go against a premade. But I think that's simply not going to work because the player base, in the absence of a cross-server queue in this game, is unfortunately not big enough anymore, and it would just mean that as a premade, you would probably sit in the queue for half an hour or 1 hour until you go against another premade. And I guess everyone would queue solo, which probably would be interesting as well. But this is exactly the reason why they got rid of ranked, with its separation of a solo ranked and a group ranked queue. Group ranked was simply dead, which is why they removed it, and now they had the idea that was good in theory to throw premates and solo players together in a general Warzone and arena queue. But of course, in practice, it simply doesn't work for the reasons that I explained earlier. So yeah, solo queue for Warzones, I'm not a big fan. Let's see what they do with it. When it comes to this matchmaking, again, I would suggest to simply bring the premates back to 4 players max, and maybe improve the matchmaking with regards to the support roles, especially, so that you're never going to have games where against 2 healers and 3 tanks and nothing ever dies. So let's see what Bioware does. One thing that they're changing that is good, at least, is that they're reducing the Q dodge timer. So the ban that you are getting, or the lockout, if you leave a war zone or you disconnect, they're changing that from 20 minutes back to 5 minutes. So this is good, because it means, if you're in a war zone that you really don't want to play because you're being held hostage by a damage farming 8-man premade, then at least you can leave the war zone, and after 5 minutes you can play your next game. That's a good change in general. Of course, the release date is not yet known. If that changes, I will let you know in another video, and we're going to be looking at the patch notes. Who knows? Maybe Bioware will have some more surprises in their back pocket. Until then, if you're a solo player, I can recommend that you try to find a guild, form a premade, and start making some friends, because the solo player experience is really not that fun at the moment. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know in the comments below what you would do if you were Bioware, or what changes you would like to see. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.